Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is a Devil May Cry 5 tutorial for beginners. So Devil May Cry 5 has just come out, and feverishly we are all absorbing it, devouring it, and doing our best to understand what exactly this new beast is that we're all playing with. But alas, not everybody here is going to understand such terminology as iframes, distorted real impacts, dart flying, all this crazy nomenclature of the community that maybe you're not quite as hardcore as some of those crazy style runner guys who do all the fancy combos and jump cancel the entire thing. And I did it there, didn't I? I assumed you understand what a jump cancel is. Maybe you didn't come from fighting games. Who knows? At the end of the day, with anything new, there is an influx of new people to these games that don't have the legacy understanding that some other players do. So hopefully this video can be quite short and concise and bring everybody up to spec with what is expected of them in stopping this most recent demon Armageddon. So our tutorial begins with Nero, arguably one of the simpler characters in the series, but by no means easy and without depth. Nero is the entry-level character who, given enough time and practice, you will come to understand that there is a whole host more to him than is on the surface. And when you combine that with some of the new mechanics that are in Devil May Cry 5, you can literally get to the point where every encounter is just a ballet, a choreographed, wonderfully practiced, well-versed rendition of your favourite assortment of combinations and techniques. But nobody gets there immediately, guys. It takes everybody time, and it takes everybody over a course of many years for some players, because people have been playing Devil May Cry for a long time, to get to just the level of aptitude and affinity that they have to do the things that they do, that they don't even realise that they're doing anymore. And this tutorial is hopefully going to enable you to understand some of the things that you can do in this game, to add them to your arsenal, and to altogether become a slightly better player and a slightly more stylish player for the people chasing those elusive S ranks. What I'm going to cover in this video is not going to be the philosophy of how to engage, how to interact, and what to do as Nero, because I do believe on a personal level that the way you choose to fight in these games is a reflection of your personality. And depending on what you like and depending on what you think is cool and your values will mostly shape and show a different type of combat than perhaps my combat does. But what you will get from this video is that there are certain things anybody can add to their repertoire that will immediately see beneficial returns. The first of this is the understanding that jumping has invincibility frames. Iframes, invulnerability frames, invincible frames, whatever you want to call it, immortal frames. Iframes is essentially just a shortened term for a period of time within any point where your character cannot take damage. There are so many ways to get into this state in action games that there are a few you might not have realised you can use handily and at the call of a simple button. The two most simple ones are jumping. When you jump in Devil May Cry, you are invincible up to the zenith, the peak of your jump. If you reach that point and are still in an active hitbox, you will take damage. However, if you wait for somebody to start striking you and you press jump as that is about to hit, you will never take damage. Ever. As long as you time it well, and as long as you know what the move is and you get out of its hitbox, you will always avoid it. If you're not a fan of the idea of using the jump and perhaps you're a trickster player, the second easiest way to dodge damage is by pressing dodge with trickster. People that don't know what trickster is a style that Dante can utilise, but unfortunately Nero cannot. However, it is a one-button dodge for him, which is really handy for people getting used to Dante, but I'll go over more of that in his video. However, Nero doesn't get trickster, so the second dodge for Nero is his roll. And this is where a lot of new players get tripped up, and this is where the complaint that Devil May Cry does not have a designated evade button oftentimes gets cited. So when you lock on with the right bumper, or R1, you will notice that your character will face the enemy that it's locked onto, and it will then lock you into positioning where you will always keep the camera focused on them and you will move around. When you hold forward and press jump, you will jump forward. When you hold backwards and press jump, you will jump backwards. However, if you hold left and press jump, you will not do a left jump, you will roll. And this is very, very important, guys, because the roll is different to the jump, obviously, but it's different for different reasons. Firstly, the roll can be really good at low profiling things. Low profile is just a fancy way of saying being so low that things that are higher than you can't affect you. So, for instance, if an enemy does a move that is quite active but is jumping, perhaps jumping is not the best idea to do in that moment, but the roll will send you underneath them and you will not be in any threat of being hit by them. Additionally, you can buy a skill called Table Hopper, which will enable you to time your roll almost perfectly as an enemy is about to hit you, and you will do a rather fancy evade that not only builds style, but gives you follow-up options to get back into the pocket behind the enemy and then reprise with your own attacks. This is incredibly important for the people that use that a lot, because it puts you into a position of power from a defensive position. And one of the things a lot of new players seem to forget, and I say forget like they already knew, but they didn't, of course, one of those things that you don't really learn until you see someone else doing it. Or perhaps you're an autodidactic wizard, I don't know, but Devil May Cry is a game about aggression. It's a game about constantly being on the attack. Of course, you can play it defensively, and there are lots of defensive tools, but the one uniform feature that a lot of the higher level players that will touch this game you will see is that they are always finding opportunities to attack whatever it is that's on the screen. And Table Hopper enables you to do that wonderfully. And of course, it does give you iframes, much like the jump does. I don't know for certain because I've never measured it, and it's one of those things I haven't data mined or searched on Google for at least 40 seconds. But I believe that the iframes in the roll are perhaps lesser than the jump, because I think it's more of a specialist tool. But I could be wrong, guys. But all you need to know is that those are your two main evasive options with Nero. And the good thing about those moves is that you start with them. You do not have to purchase them. One person might say, why not use Gerbera? Gerbera offers you wonderful aerial mobility and great amounts of evades and dodges and things of that nature, and that is true, but it's indicative of having the right arm. If you don't have the right breaker, you can't use Gerbera, so this is a fundamental that will help you play this game. The second imperative fundamental as Nero is the rev system, or the exceed system, or the act system, depending on what you want to call it. However, I have to state right now, guys, this is something that you'll have to purchase for you to get to the point where it really starts to pay off. But trust me when I say this, playing Nero is all about this system. So what is it? Rather simple, but infinitely complex when it comes to its precision. The exceed system is the ability to rev the motorcycle handle of Nero's sword. And if done correctly, you will power up his weapon and it will get this flame boosted added effect to his animations, and he'll get exclusive animations and exclusive moves, and he'll do really interesting and devastating things. On a base level, the reason why this system is so useful is because not only will it add extra knockback to move and give them more stun, but it will also give them more damage. And damage is something you're really going to need if you're going to be challenging the abyssal Dante Must Die mode, where the enemies in that mode actually have more health than Lazarus, and it becomes incredibly frustrating if you do not have the damage to deal what's needed. The rev system is going to help you. The one thing that needs to be stressed here is revving is all about timing. It is all about precision, it's all about muscle memory, it's all about understanding. And in the simplest terms, you swing your sword, and at the end of the animation of swinging your sword, you press the button for exceed. If you pressed it at the perfect time, you will get a max act, which is all 3 levels of your sword's rev will happen instantly. If you are good enough, you will be able to do this on every single swing that Nero can do. But doing it and saying it, very different. However, even if you only get 1, it can oftentimes facilitate you into getting 3 and then exposing those level 3 moves to some of the enemies and really just melting everything in your way. The more you do it, the easier it tends to get because you get more of a feeling for it and the more natural it becomes. The biggest problem with Exceed for many players outside of the timing is just remembering to do it. When you play a video game traditionally, for instance, if you came from the game people love to reference right now, which is the Soul series, you're somebody who likes a good challenge, you like good combat, You're not used to pressing a button after another button. You're not used to the concept of swinging a weapon and then doing something as the weapon is swinging, because it is not the most natural thing to do. It's not oftentimes presented to us. With Nero, it is, and it is key to your success to do this. So use the void mode, guys. That's what it's for. Learn to rev, get those level 3 moves, and absolutely decimate. And speaking of decimation, here's a clip of TheGodfatherDictator, one of the most ferocious Neros when it comes to exceeding. Another essential aspect of Nero's game, in my opinion, of any level, is the understanding and ability to stay in the air. Staying in the air in this game is incredibly useful and safe, especially for Nero. Nero has a much easier time than Dante, even though Dante, with the correct use of Trickster into the aerial taunt into Trickster, can do a lot of things to keep enemies high and keep him off the floor. But with Nero, you're not going to have those fast hands and swap around as much, because it's actually much simpler. But it's reliant on one skill that I recommend that you purchase that you might not have thought to purchase. And that is the enemy step. In this game, enemy step costs, I believe, 45,000 orbs to pick up, and it enables you to jump off an enemy. By itself, you might be wondering, why would I ever want to jump off an enemy? It sounds like something that's counterintuitive to my willful destruction and wanting to kill them immediately. Well, jumping off an enemy does a handful of really cool things. The most important one is it gives you more height. So for instance, if you're chasing down a pesky death scissors in the air, if you're attacking him and you start to fall, when you press jump, you will jump off his cape, off his cloak, back into the air, and you can combo him again, because it complements the second thing that jumping on an enemy does. When you jump in this game, you are limited to certain actions. For instance, there's a double jump in this game, something called the air hike. When you do an air hike, you can't jump anymore. You're out of jumps, even though with Nero you can do a third jump, you know what I mean? You are then unable to jump at all. You have exceeded your expenditure on jumping in the air. However, if you bounce off an enemy, it resets your ability to jump, so the air hike that you just wasted is now yours again. And this works the same with the Trickster moves with Dante. So if you jump into the air and you dash forward with Trickster, if you reach an enemy and start attacking him and you jump off him, you can then do that same aerial dodge with Trickster away from the enemy or towards him again, jump off him, and continually reset that move. If you've watched a combo video where somebody was zipping around the screen constantly and you couldn't understand how they could do it because you can only do it once, now you know why they were doing it, because they were resetting it with enemy step. And it leads us to the discussion that I'm not going to have on this video because it's a little bit too large of a discussion that I'm probably going to put in something else, and that is jump cancelling. Jump cancelling in its simplest terms is essentially using the jump to cancel an animation so that you can immediately do something else. It can be seen in various measures and various ways, and it can be incredibly useful. With Nero, jump cancelling is also useful, but you will see the full frontal nudity of it when you play as Dante. He will be donging everything repeatedly, swapping styles, swapping weapons, doing all hosts of crazy things, and he's doing it because he's probably jump cancelling. Don't stress too much about that stuff just yet, because if you are a beginner and you're watching this and it's all very intimidating, going immediately into trying to jump cancel is probably not the best fundamental you could be learning. But enemy stepping to stay in the air, very useful. How do you stay in the air using enemy step with Nero? Quite simple, and anybody can do this. So begin by jumping into the air, and then use your Devil Bringer or your Breaker Bringer, which is hold the right bumper, or R1, and use B or circle. Once you do that, you will whip out your hand and you will pull the enemy towards you. There are certain circumstances where this won't work, certain larger enemies, certain bosses, things like that. Additionally, when they devil trigger, they can become more difficult to pull, and certain ones just won't be pulled depending on their states, but we won't go into that. When you do this, Nero will pull the enemy towards himself. Then all you do is press jump. Don't attack, don't do anything silly, just jump. Jump off the enemy, and then whip them again. R1, circle, boom. Bring them back to you, jump off them. Then whip them again. Breaker, jump, until you get to the max height or as high as you want to be, and then start doing your combos. Start practicing your moves, and then if you drop them, or if they fall away from you, you pull them straight back. And when you're up in the sky like that, you are at the most safest you can be in almost any encounter, because there are few enemies that can reach you. The next thing I want to talk about is another fundamental that has been in the series for quite some time, that a lot of people know, a lot of people use, and might not necessarily know that they're using it. It's just one of those fundamental muscle memories that they've conditioned themselves to exploit throughout the series, and that is the idea of camera manipulation. So in this game, if you have an enemy on camera, they will move towards you generally aggressively, doing attacks. If you turn the camera off them, they cannot attack. The enemies will go into a more passive state when the camera is off them, and they will move to get back on camera so they can do an attack. Here's where things get a little bit dicey. In Devil May Cry 5, the camera is, for lack of a better word, dog shit. There are times when it's great, there are times when it's awful, there are times when it's so close you can see the paws in Nero's face, there's times when it's so far away you feel like you're playing Shadow of the Colossus. The camera is very dynamic, and at times you can't even control it, which is mind-numbingly stupid, but it's how the game is made, so you can't do anything, you'll have to deal with it. But when you can use it, you have to be careful, because if an enemy starts an attack, and you turn the camera away from him, he's not going to stop. He will continue that attack and land it on you, and you'll regret it. And this leads to moments where you feel like you were attacked off screen, when you actually weren't. However, if you need an opportunity to get a breather, to do some taunting and get some devil trigger, or just to run around with Sweet Surrender on, pretending you're being jacked off by Kyrie, this is the time where camera manipulation will help, because if you run around the outskirts of the arena keeping enemies off the screen, you will never take any unnecessary damage, and even if they do come on the screen and start to attack, you can then jump away and stay safe. But the fundamental principle of camera manipulation, if the enemy is off screen, they cannot attack. The next beginner tip, and mainstay of a lot of Nero players, is access to charging your weapon while fighting. This is something that a lot of new players have a lot of difficulty with, because they can't understand how anybody can hold square and then do all the other stuff that's needed of you to be done in these games, because a lot of the times it's multiple inputs, holding several buttons, and it can get very complicated very quickly. Some people can do that. Some people can hold the default layout and do all the fancy stuff, and they've just conditioned themselves to do it by practice and patience, and you can too. However, I would recommend a much easier method, which is simply to remap the buttons. In Devil May Cry 5 you can remap nearly all of the buttons, and the ones that you can't lead to immense frustration on this player's part. However, gun can be remapped. In Devil May Cry 4, when I first started experiencing Nero, I swapped my gun to the right trigger, because holding the right trigger while doing things that are needed to be done in this game is something that you can learn to do and something you can do subconsciously. However, we now live in a post-ridiculous controller customization, scuff this, scuff that world, which means we can now use these elite controllers, these scuff controllers, these fancy controllers that have paddles and alternative layouts and all kinds of crazy shit that will enable you to map it to something much more ergonomic. If you have one of those controllers with the paddles, feel free to map it to the back of those. I personally wish I had one of those controllers, because I find it very difficult to hold circle to charge up a breaker attack while doing everything else, because you only have so many fingers, right? And I can't even begin to tell you how tempted I was to use the kick drum pedal from my Guitar Hero drum set as a button in this game, just like plug it into my PC, map it, and then use that to charge some stuff, because that'd just be so apropos, wouldn't it? But changing your gun to a button that is easy to hold is going to introduce you to the concept of incredible damage. It is nowhere near as useful and as devastating as it was in 4, And if it is, I haven't really discovered its purposes yet, but it is still immeasurably useful because the gun can interrupt, the gun will launch enemies, the gun can do all kinds of strange things, it has wonderful properties. It's one of the simple changes that once you learn it, you will see a direct result in your gameplay. The next useful thing for Nero that you might have already keyed into from some of the videos I've done before if you've seen my channel before, and that is this idea of air taunting with Nero. Nero's air taunt is very powerful, and it's powerful for a few reasons. A few crazy reasons that make you question what the developers were thinking, but still I'm going to utilize it and I'm going to show you how as well. So the air taunt on itself, he will do a wonderful homage to like a skateboarding technique where he rides his sword and he says something like riding high, something like that. Well, the first cool thing about this is you can rev off of it and exceed and get your sword buffed, and you can max act off of it as well. So if your timing is good enough, when you're in a fight and you've just done a combo and knocked somebody away, you can hit taunt after you recover, immediately power your sword up and then come down with a double down, which is a really, really good way of going back into immediate damage. It enables you to do a whole host of things you might not have realised. So, have you ever wanted to get on top of a roof but you've not been able to do it because you couldn't quite get the range or the height or the length that you needed on a jump? Well, if you're high enough now, if you jump forward and you do a caliber in midair, you can then use the taunt, shoot your gun, use the taunt, shoot your gun, and then cover incredible amounts of distance. If you combine that with Gerbera, you can Gerbera into taunt, into Gerbera, into taunt, into Gerbera, and the thing that's really puzzling is you can taunt as many times as you want in midair, it's not limited to one. So you can stay in the air indefinitely just by using the air taunt. And admittedly, if you don't mix it up with something else, you are going to gradually fall and gradually fall and gradually fall, but if used correctly with enemy step and the Devilbringer and Gerbera and things like that, you are going to be able to stay in the air getting free revs all day, and anybody can do it. The only problem is you cannot seem to remap the taunt button, and I don't know why. I am pressing back, which is what a lot of you people are probably pressing as well. If I could personally, I would swap that button to start and I would make back the menu, because I almost never use the menus in this game, and moving my finger from the buttons to back or select is a much greater distance than I would like in the speed that I need to do it. And it's not the most difficult thing to do, but convenience-wise, it would be so much better. And I could remap it and things like that, but I'm not going to do that because that involves using third-party software, but you know what I mean. But the taunt, very useful. And then the final cherry on top to the taunt is that it gives you style points. It will actively help your style increase, which is something you need to be doing because styling on this game is going to be tricky for some players. And then the final fundamental is something that you're not going to be able to utilize until you've beaten the game, but is very useful anyway, and that is activating your Devil Trigger. Activating your Devil Trigger as Nero used to be one of the most important parts of his kit. In Devil May Cry 4, it made you invincible, and it was something you could use all the time to avoid damage, and I personally feel that by losing that mechanic, it's hurt Nero in a lot of ways, and I feel like 4 was a considerably better game for that particular piece of skillful technique, which didn't take that much skill. However, in this game, it's slightly different, but it does carry some interesting properties. When you are neutral and you activate your Devil Trigger, I believe at a certain threshold, Nero will do this fist into the air, and it will launch enemies that are close to you. Enemies that are in a neutral state or in a vulnerable state will get launched. It works on a whole host of heavy-duty enemies as well, and when you launch an enemy by knocking them into the sky, it puts them in a vulnerable state where you can grab them, which is really, really good for a player who's not very confident in his combos and he wants to do good damage. So using the taunt to launch an enemy who's particularly stubborn, or using it to get people away from you or knock a bunch of people up for combo potential, is one of the great uses of his ability. So it's something to definitely practice with and understand how it works and when it doesn't work. And on top of this, the most important part about activating it is that it oftentimes helps you recover. So one of the biggest positions of disadvantage in Devil May Cry is when you get stuck in an animation. Certain animations are long-winded, and you're in them until you're out of them, and that period can be an eternity in a game as fast as this. If you've ever done the cascade with the double clean at hands, that move does so much damage because afterwards the recovery on it is so high. Did you notice how you couldn't cancel it with Royal Guard or Trickster or swapping weapons? You had to eat that animation for way longer than you wanted. That's the price of the damage it does. One of the great things about Devil Trigger is it will usually cancel nigh most of the moves that you're in, as long as you're in a certain threshold of them. So if you ever find yourself in a combo and you can't get out of it and you've pressed jump and you got nothing, try Devil Trigger. It will not always save your ass, but it oftentimes will. I am not the person to really be telling you the best utilizations of Devil Trigger because I haven't tested it enough. But as a new player touching this game, when you get that feature, it doesn't necessarily just have to be a measure of getting HP back and of fighting and doing a bit more damage or just looking like a super badass horned angel. It does have extra features, and experimentation is going to help you understand them and use them, utilize them and improve them. But there you go, folks. I have no doubt missed something imperative and something useful to any beginning Devil May Cry player when it comes to Nero, but I feel like the things that I've touched upon aren't the highest level things, and if you start to apply them to your own game, you will immediately see that there is so much more to his playstyle than potentially what you were using before, and hopefully those S ranks will start flowing a little faster, you'll start avoiding a little bit more damage, and then give yourself a few weeks, you'll be an absolute monster. Thank you for watching, and you take care now.